A single candle burned in the highest chamber of the Red Keep long before the bells of dawn. Beyond the narrow window, King's Landing still slept beneath a blanket of darkness, its crooked streets hidden beneath mist drifting inland from Blackwater Bay. Far below, the last taverns had gone quiet, the harbor chains rested motionless, and only a handful of watchfires flickered along the city walls. The chamber itself smelled of cooled wax, polished oak, and damp stone that had absorbed centuries of whispered conspiracies. Beside that window stood Queen Cersei Lannister, unmoving, watching a kingdom that believed it understood her. This is the story of why Cersei was the smartest player in the Game of Thrones, told slowly enough to carry you gently towards sleep while wandering through the history George R.R. Martin built one careful stone at a time. If you've traveled with these stories before, quietly note which night you've reached. If this is your first visit, simply call it Night 1. Most people remember Cersei for her failures. They remember the wildfire beneath the Great Sept, the Walk of Atonement, her endless rivalry with Tyrion, or the prophecy that haunted her from childhood. Yet those memories often blur together into a portrait of arrogance, overlooking something much more interesting hidden beneath the surface. History inside Westeros is rarely written by impartial hands, and Martin's own histories constantly remind us that the loudest version of events is not always the truest one. So before we judge Cersei by the end of her story, we should begin where every careful maester begins. Not with the queen everyone feared, but with the girl who learned that power belonged to those who saw the board before anyone else even realized they were playing. Why does one prophecy seem to explain an entire lifetime? That question has followed readers since the first pages describing Maggie the Frog. Yet the answer becomes more complicated every time we retrace Cersei's steps. Long before Robert Baratheon wore a crown, or Eddard Stark rode south from Winterfell, House Lannister ruled the Westerlands from Casterly Rock, the greatest fortress carved into a mountain of stone overlooking the Sunset Sea. Lord Tywin Lannister had transformed his house into the richest and most disciplined family in the Seven Kingdoms after crushing the rebellious houses Rhaen and Tarbeck. Gold flowed endlessly from the mines beneath the rock. Merchants crowded the nearby port of Lannisport, and every ambitious lord measured himself against Tywin's relentless standard. Cersei entered that world in the year 266 after conquest, born only moments before her twin brother Jaime, the two children arriving so close together that old servants claimed they had never truly learned how to exist apart. Their mother, Joanna Lannister, was remembered throughout the realm for intelligence that matched her beauty. She had served as lady-in-waiting to Queen Rhaenyra Targaryen before marrying Tywin, and many chroniclers suggest hers was one of the few voices capable of softening Lord Tywin's harder instincts. For 7 years, Cersei knew a household balanced between affection and discipline, where every lesson carried purpose and every mistake was quietly corrected before it could become weakness. Then, in 273 AC, Joanna died giving birth to Tyrion Lannister. That single event fractured the entire family. Tywin withdrew behind walls of duty and silence. Jaime buried himself in training with sword and lance. Tyrion grew beneath the shadow of blame he never deserved, and Cersei lost the one person who treated her not as a political asset, but simply as a daughter. Many readers see that loss as the beginning of Cersei's bitterness, but it also became the beginning of her education. Unlike many noble girls across Westeros, Cersei did not grow up entirely sheltered within embroidery chambers and marriage negotiations. Living beside Tywin meant overhearing councils, observing bannermen, watching disputes over land, taxes, inheritance, and military service. She learned which houses could be trusted only after receiving hostages, which knights sought glory more eagerly than wisdom, and how debts often chained a lord more securely than iron. Tywin never intended to prepare Cersei to rule in her own name. He intended to prepare her to strengthen House Lannister through marriage. Yet knowledge has little regard for the intentions of teachers, and Cersei absorbed every lesson simply because she refused to believe that being born a woman made her less capable than any son. Why then did she spend so much of her youth comparing herself not with other noble ladies, but with Jaime? The answer rests inside the strange bond the twins shared from birth. Jaime and Cersei resembled one another so closely that people often remarked they looked like reflections separated only by clothing. They played together, learned together, and understood each other with a familiarity that often unsettled those around them. Cersei later believed that the gods had made them two halves of a single whole, a belief that would shape many choices throughout her life. While Jaime excelled with sword and shield under Master-at-Arms, Cersei watched from nearby, convinced that if custom had allowed it, she could have trained beside him. Her frustration was not directed toward Jaime himself. It was directed toward a society that celebrated the talents of one twin while quietly ignoring the ambitions of the other. One story preserved in the histories captures that frustration perfectly. When young Jaime received praise for his growing skill at arms, Cersei reportedly dressed herself in his clothing so they might exchange places unnoticed, at least for a short while. The deception did not last, but the desire behind it never faded. Throughout her life, she would repeatedly compare her own judgment to that of the men surrounding her, often concluding that they were no wiser than she was. Sometimes she judged correctly. Sometimes pride clouded her vision. Yet the important detail is this: Cersei never accepted the limits others expected her to embrace. From childhood onward, she believed authority should belong to the most capable person, and she never doubted that she belonged among them. Then came the journey that no amount of wealth or noble birth could erase. Near Lannisport lived an old woods witch known as Maggie the Frog. Though she'd once come from the distant lands across the narrow sea, children whispered stories about her strange potions and unsettling predictions. Cersei, accompanied by Malara Heatherspoon, sought the woman out in secret, driven by curiosity rather than caution. Inside the small dwelling, surrounded by herbs, smoke, and dim candlelight, Maggie answered questions that neither girl fully understood. She foretold that Cersei would marry a king, not the prince she imagined. She declared that the king would have 16 children, while Cersei herself would bear only 3, each crowned with gold and later wrapped in golden shrouds. Finally came the words that echoed through every decade that followed. Another queen, younger and more beautiful, would cast Cersei down and take everything she held dear. Those lines have inspired endless discussion among readers because Martin leaves an important uncertainty unresolved. Was Maggie describing an unavoidable future, or did the prophecy become powerful only because Cersei believed it completely. Every major decision afterward seems touched by those predictions. Her suspicion toward younger women, especially those who gained influence at court, never truly faded. Her desperate protection of her children often crossed into ruthless calculation. Even before she possessed any real political authority, she viewed the world as a contest against enemies not yet visible. The prophecy became less like a map of destiny and more like a lens through which she interpreted every success and every threat. Once a person begins searching for confirmation, even ordinary events can start appearing like signs carefully arranged by fate. The in-world sources themselves leave room for quiet uncertainty. Unlike many events recorded in Fire and Blood, Maggie's prophecy comes through Cersei's own memories in the novels rather than conflicting maester accounts. We know what Cersei remembers hearing, yet memory itself is rarely flawless, especially when shaped by fear over many years. Did Maggie speak every word exactly as Cersei recalls it? Or did decades of anxiety sharpen certain phrases while softening others? Martin offers no correction, because the exact wording matters less than its effect. Whether perfectly remembered or slightly transformed by time, the prophecy became one of the invisible architects of Cersei's life. As dawn slowly approached outside the Red Keep, the first pale light reached the rooftops of King's Landing. The towers remained silent, but somewhere below, stable boys began their morning work, and the harbor slowly stirred awake. Cersei still stood beside the narrow window, looking across a city that believed queens were born when crowns touched their heads. She knew differently. In her mind, queens were shaped years earlier, inside castles far from the capital, by loss, by ambition, by family, and by words spoken in dark rooms that refused to fade. Before Robert Baratheon ever rode through the gates of King's Landing in triumph, before the Iron Throne became the center of her world, the game had already begun, and Cersei Lannister had already decided she would never again allow anyone else to define the limits of her power. Why did Cersei accept becoming Robert Baratheon's queen when nearly every account suggests she despised him long before their marriage had truly begun? The answer appears simple at first glance, yet every layer beneath it reveals another calculation. In 283 AC, the Seven Kingdoms emerged exhausted from Robert's rebellion. King Aerys II Targaryen was dead at the hands of Sir Jaime Lannister inside the Red Keep. Prince Rhaegar Targaryen had fallen upon the Trident beneath Robert's warhammer. House Targaryen's 3-century rule had collapsed almost overnight, and every surviving great house was measuring how best to secure its place beneath a new king. Cersei did not marry into peace. She married into a kingdom that was still deciding who truly held power. Lord Tywin Lannister had remained neutral through much of the rebellion, watching events unfold from Casterly Rock with characteristic patience. Only after the Battle of the Trident had broken Prince Rhaegar's army did Tywin finally march east with 12,000 Westermen beneath crimson lion banners. King Aerys, desperate and increasingly unstable, opened the gates of King's Landing, believing his former hand had returned to defend him. Instead, the city was brutally sacked. Sir Gregor Clegane killed Princess Aelia Martell and her young children, Prince Aegon and Princess Rhaenys, while Sir Amory Lorch participated in the slaughter. These murders remain among the darkest stains upon House Lannister's rise, and they also demonstrated Tywin's understanding of a cruel political truth. Arriving late allowed him to stand with the victors while avoiding many of the rebellion's greatest risks. Robert Baratheon understood that victory alone could not guarantee stability. His claim rested partly through his grandmother, Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen, yet conquest by itself rarely secured lasting peace in Westeros. He needed allies whose wealth could rebuild the crown after years of war. No house possessed greater riches than the Lannisters. The gold mines beneath Casterly Rock and the nearby Golden Tooth had enriched the Westerlands for generations, while Lannisport remained one of the busiest ports in the Sunset Sea. A marriage between Robert and Cersei transformed former political convenience into public unity. The realm saw reconciliation. Tywin saw influence. Cersei saw the crown she had once imagined wearing beside Prince Rhaegar. That forgotten dream deserves careful attention because it reveals how dramatically history had shifted. Years before Robert's rebellion, Cersei believed she would become the wife of Prince Rhaegar Targaryen. According to her own recollections in the novels, she admired the handsome heir to the Iron Throne and expected Tywin's ambition would make such a marriage possible. Instead, King Aerys rejected the proposal outright, one more insult added to the growing hostility between the king and his former hand. When Robert replaced Rhaegar as her husband, the prophecy of Maggie the Frog had already fulfilled its first unmistakable promise. She would indeed marry a king, but not the one she had imagined as a young girl standing outside the witch's cottage near Lannisport. The wedding itself solved political problems while creating deeply personal ones. Robert entered the marriage still mourning Lyanna Stark, whose death at the Tower of Joy marked the tragic end of his rebellion. Cersei entered believing that affection could eventually grow, or at least that respect might replace romance. For a brief period, she later admits she genuinely hoped their union could succeed. One remembered conversation, one shared smile, one night when Robert called her by her own name instead of Lyanna's seemed enough to sustain that hope. Then, according to Cersei's own account, Robert whispered Lyanna's name while lying beside her, and whatever possibility remained quietly disappeared before the marriage had truly begun. Why does that single detail matter so much? Because it shaped the political relationship between king and queen more than any tournament, council meeting, or military campaign ever could. Robert increasingly escaped responsibility through hunting, feasting, drinking, and tournaments. The royal court remained busy with petitions, tax disputes, appointments, marriages, harbor fees, grain shortages, and the endless practical burdens of governing a continent-sized kingdom. Someone had to observe all of it. Even when Jon Arryn served as Hand of the King with extraordinary diligence, Cersei remained present inside the machinery of royal government every single day. She watched envoys arrive from Dorne, merchants negotiate contracts from the free cities, lordly quarrels unfold inside council chambers, and ambitious courtiers rise or disappear depending on who held influence that particular month. The small council itself became one of the finest classrooms in Westeros. Lord Jon Arryn presided as Hand. Grand Maester Pycelle represented the Citadel, while quietly favoring Lannister interests. Lord Varys the master of whisperers, maintained his immense network of spies stretching from Flea Bottom to Pentos. Peder Baelish, called Littlefinger, steadily increased crown revenues while simultaneously burying the Iron Throne beneath enormous debt. Stannis Baratheon served as master of ships with relentless efficiency before withdrawing increasingly from court. Renly Baratheon cultivated popularity among younger lords despite holding comparatively little administrative experience. Robert often ignored these men unless war demanded his attention. Cersei did not. She studied each personality as though memorizing the strengths and weaknesses of future opponents. Many readers underestimate just how observant Cersei became during these years because Martin rarely places her directly at the center of council debates in the earlier novels. Yet influence often grows through listening rather than speaking. She watched Varys smile while revealing almost nothing. She learned that Baelish preferred debts over armies because creditors could achieve victories. Soldiers never could. She saw Pycelle carefully present himself as an obedient servant while subtly guiding discussions toward outcomes favorable to House Lannister. None of these lessons required a crown. They required patience. The queen, who later appeared impulsive, had first spent well over a decade watching masters of political survival conduct their work from only a few steps away. Meanwhile, another decision quietly reshaped both House Lannister and the royal family. Years earlier, Jaime Lannister had accepted appointment to Aerys II's Kingsguard. Officially, this was one of the greatest honors a knight could receive. In reality, many believed Aerys intended it as another humiliation for Tywin, ensuring his only lawful son could never inherit Casterly Rock because members of the Kingsguard renounced lands, titles, wives, and legitimate heirs. After Robert claimed the throne, Jaime astonishingly remained in the White Cloak. The new king chose continuity over revenge, preserving one of the realm's finest swordsmen while leaving Tywin without a direct male heir at the Rock other than Tyrion. Cersei, however, gained something else entirely. Jaime's permanent presence inside the Red Keep meant the person she trusted above every other remained constantly within reach. It is impossible to understand Cersei's political confidence without recognizing that certainty. Throughout the novels, she repeatedly assumes that blood outweighs every other bond in Westeros. Alliances break, lords change allegiance, sellswords change employers, even sworn oaths can fracture beneath pressure. Family in Cersei's view should remain absolute. That conviction echoes Tywin's relentless insistence that the legacy of House Lannister must always come before individual desire. Yet Cersei carried the idea somewhere Tywin never intended. For her loyalty became inseparable from Jaime himself, the one person she believed could never betray her. Whether that belief strengthened her or blinded her is a question the coming years will answer. As seasons passed, King's Landing settled into the appearance of stability. Markets filled once more beneath the shadow of Aegon's high hill. Ships unloaded spices from Lees, wool from the Vale, and wine from the Arbor. Gold cloaks patrolled crowded streets where bakers, armorers, and fishmongers carried on ordinary lives beneath the looming walls of the Red Keep. Visitors saw a prosperous capital ruled by a victorious king, attended by a beautiful queen, protected by the greatest houses in the realm. Only a handful of people noticed the quiet imbalance growing beneath that polished surface. Robert believed winning a kingdom had ended the game. Cersei had already begun learning that keeping one required an entirely different kind of intelligence. Why did Cersei gamble everything on a secret that could have destroyed House Lannister the moment it became known? It is one of the greatest contradictions in her life. She spent years studying politics, understanding succession, legitimacy, and the fragile balance upon which every crown rested, yet she built the future of the realm upon a truth that could never safely be spoken aloud. To many readers, this appears reckless. Look more closely, however, and another possibility emerges. Cersei believed the greatest dangers in Westeros came not from impossible secrets, but from predictable men. The relationship between Cersei and Jaime Lannister had never truly ended with childhood. After their marriage, vows took them onto different paths. Jaime into the white cloak of the Kingsguard, and Cersei into Robert's royal household. They found ways to remain together inside the Red Keep. The Kingsguard occupied chambers close to the royal apartments, allowing Jaime to move through the castle with little suspicion. Unlike most knights, he answered directly to the king rather than any lord, giving him unusual freedom within the palace. Cersei later insists that Jaime was the only man she ever truly loved. Whether readers accept that claim entirely or not, there is no doubt that she trusted him more completely than anyone else in the Seven Kingdoms. That trust produced consequences reaching far beyond their private lives. Prince Joffrey, Princess Myrcella, and Prince Tommen were publicly acknowledged as the legitimate children of King Robert Baratheon. All three displayed unmistakably Lannister features, described repeatedly throughout the novels: golden hair, green eyes, and fair complexions. Robert himself possessed the classic Baratheon appearance inherited from House Durrandon through Orys Baratheon, and reinforced by generations of black-haired marriages. Thick black hair, blue eyes, and immense physical strength defined nearly every legitimate Baratheon known to history. On their own, blonde children proved nothing. Noble families often inherited unexpected traits, yet together with centuries of genealogy, they formed a pattern that eventually drew dangerous attention. One man noticed before almost anyone else. Lord John Arryn, Hand of the King since the end of Robert's rebellion, had governed the realm faithfully for nearly 15 years. He had fostered both Robert Baratheon and Eddard Stark in the Vale under Lord John Arryn's own roof at the Eyrie, forging the friendships that ultimately shaped the rebellion itself. By the closing years of his life, something troubled him deeply enough to begin investigating noble bloodlines. Assisted by Stannis Baratheon, he examined old family records preserved by Grand Maester Mallion in the Red Keep. Again and again he encountered the same conclusion. Whenever Baratheons married into other great houses, the black hair almost always prevailed. The phrase, "the seed is strong," became the quiet key to John Arryn's investigation. Those words referred not to magic or prophecy, but to inheritance observed across generations. Baratheons who married Targaryens, Arryns, Florents, Penroses, and countless others consistently produced dark-haired heirs. Robert himself fathered numerous acknowledged and unacknowledged bastards throughout the Seven Kingdoms. In King's Landing lived Gendry, apprenticed to Tobho Mott, the master armorer. At the brothel owned by Chitaya worked a young girl named Bara's mother. whose infant also bore Robert's unmistakable coloring. Others lived scattered across the Stormlands and the Crownlands. Every one of them carried black hair. Only the royal children did not. Why does Jon Arryn's discovery matter so profoundly? Because he pursued evidence instead of rumor. Westeros has never lacked gossip concerning queens, lovers, or ambitious courtiers. Such whispers usually disappear beneath stronger political winds. Jon Arryn did something much more dangerous. He gathered proof that could overturn the royal succession itself. If Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen were not Robert's true-born heirs, then by every law of inheritance recognized across the Seven Kingdoms, the Iron Throne should pass to Robert's eldest surviving brother, Stannis Baratheon of Dragonstone. The issue was not simply adultery. It was the legitimacy of the monarchy. Jon Arryn died before presenting his conclusions publicly, and his death remains one of the great turning points of the saga. Officially, Grand Maester Pycelle announced that the elderly Hand succumbed to illness after a brief decline. The truth, revealed much later through Peter Baelish and Lisa Arryn, was very different. Acting under Littlefinger's manipulation, Lisa poisoned her own husband with the tears of Lys before fleeing to the Eyrie with their young son, Robert Arryn. Her letter accusing the Lannisters deliberately redirected suspicion toward Casterly Rock and away from the true conspirators. Cersei herself neither ordered nor anticipated Jon Arryn's murder. This distinction matters because it reminds us that even while Cersei believed she understood the game, other players were quietly rearranging the board without her knowledge. The arrival of Eddard Stark in King's Landing followed directly from that deception. Robert traveled north to Winterfell in 298 AC after Jon Arryn's death, asking his old friend to become the new hand of the king. Ned accepted reluctantly, honoring the memory of the man who had raised them both. From the moment he entered the capital, however, he unknowingly stepped into an investigation already begun by his predecessor. The book describing noble lineages still rested inside the Red Keep. The same questions remained unanswered. Jon Arryn had simply handed them to another man without realizing it. Unlike Littlefinger or Varys, Ned Stark approached mysteries with the instincts of a soldier and lord rather than a court intriguer. He questioned surviving servants, visited Robert's bastards, examined genealogies, and slowly assembled the same conclusion Jon Arryn had reached. One visit proved especially revealing. Gendry, though unaware of his true parentage, resembled young Robert Baratheon so strongly that anyone who had known the king in his youth could scarcely fail to notice. Broad shoulders, dark hair, blue eyes, and effortless physical strength echoed the descriptions preserved by everyone who remembered Robert before years of drinking and feasting transformed him. Ned saw the resemblance immediately. Meanwhile, Cersei remained astonishingly composed. This calm has puzzled readers for decades because she undoubtedly recognized the danger. She knew Jon Arryn had been asking questions. She knew Stannis had abruptly departed King's Landing for Dragonstone without public explanation. She knew Ned Stark possessed both honor and curiosity. Yet she did not flee, confess, or seek exile across the narrow sea. Instead, she continued managing court life as though nothing had changed. At first glance, this appears almost irrational. In reality, it reveals one of the central principles guiding her political thinking. Cersei believed that knowledge alone rarely changed history. Action changed history. A secret remained harmless until someone possessed both the courage and the opportunity to act upon it. She had watched Robert ignore council meetings, dismiss uncomfortable conversations, and spend more time hunting than governing. She had watched great lords hesitate before risking civil war. She understood that even if Ned Stark uncovered the truth, he still faced impossible choices. Would an honorable man expose 3 innocent children to disgrace? Would Robert believe accusations against the woman he had long neglected? Would the realm willingly exchange peace for another succession crisis only 15 years after Robert's rebellion? Cersei wagered that hesitation would protect her more effectively than swords. Outside the Red Keep, autumn settled over the Crownlands. Merchant caravans rolled through the King's Gate carrying grain from the Reach and wool from the Riverlands. Bells echoed from the great sept of Baelor as worshippers climbed Egan's high hill. Fishermen returned across Blackwater Bay before sunrise, while ravens departed the rookery, carrying messages to Winterfell, Riverrun, Dragonstone, and the Eyrie. The kingdom looked settled, prosperous, almost ordinary. Yet hidden beneath that quiet routine lay one unanswered question that threatened to tear apart every great house in Westeros. Only a handful of people had begun to see it, and Cersei Lannister believed she understood each of them well enough to keep the truth buried forever. Why did Cersei calmly invite Eddard Stark to reveal everything he had discovered instead of ordering his death the moment she realized the truth? At first, the decision appears almost unbelievable. The Queen knew that Ned Stark had followed the same trail once walked by Jon Arryn. She understood that he had visited Robert's bastards, questioned servants, and studied the lineages of the great houses. Yet when the confrontation finally came inside the Godswood of the Red Keep, she neither denied his accusation nor begged for mercy. Instead, she answered with remarkable composure, as though the outcome still remained firmly in her hands. That conversation beneath the ancient heart tree remains one of the defining moments of A Game of Thrones. Eddard Stark spoke plainly, just as he always did. He told Cersei that he knew Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen were Jaime's children rather than Robert's. He urged her to flee King's Landing before Robert returned from his hunt, taking her children with her across the narrow sea, where they might escape the king's wrath. Ned believed he was offering mercy. Years earlier, he had watched the bodies of Princess Elia Martell's children laid before Robert after the sack of King's Landing. He still carried the memory of those murdered infants. He refused to become responsible for another slaughter, even if those children stood between him and the lawful succession. Cersei's response has often been remembered for a single sentence: "When you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die." The line has become famous far beyond the novels, but inside its original context, it is less a boast than a statement of political reality. Cersei does not deny the danger. She simply rejects Ned's assumption that escape offers safety. To abandon King's Landing would mean surrendering the Iron Throne, exposing her children as bastards, disgracing House Lannister, and allowing Stannis Baratheon to inherit uncontested. From her perspective, flight guaranteed destruction. remaining in place at least offered the possibility of victory. Why was Cersei so confident while Ned remained uncertain? The answer begins with Robert himself. King Robert Baratheon had ridden west to hunt a great boar in the Kingswood, accompanied by his brother Renly, Sir Barristan Selmy, Lancel Lannister, Sandor Clegane, and numerous knights and retainers. Hunting had become Robert's favorite escape from governance. He still possessed tremendous physical strength, but years of heavy drinking and feasting had dulled the warrior who once defeated Prince Rhaegar on the Trident. Cersei understood her husband better than almost anyone. She knew his habits, his pride, and above all, his inability to imagine that danger could come from those closest to him. The details surrounding Robert's death deserve careful attention because later adaptations sometimes simplify them. In the novels, Lancel Lannister admits that he obeyed Cersei's instructions to provide the king with unusually strong wine during the hunt. No poison entered Robert's cup. No assassin hid among the trees. Instead, the king faced an enormous boar while heavily intoxicated. Even then, Robert killed the beast, though not before suffering terrible wounds from its tusks. The irony fits Martin's style perfectly. The man who overthrew dragons through unmatched strength ultimately fell to his own recklessness rather than to a carefully planned murder. Robert lingered for several days after being carried back to the Red Keep. Grand Maester Pycelle tended his wounds, while Eddard Stark remained constantly at his bedside. Realizing death approached, Robert dictated his final will. He named Ned Protector of the Realm until my son Joffrey reached his majority. Here Ned made one quiet alteration that reflected both his honor and his growing certainty. Instead of writing Joffrey's name exactly as Robert spoke it, he wrote, "My rightful heir." The wording preserved the king's intent while leaving room for the truth Ned believed he had uncovered. It was a subtle act of legal precision, but its success depended entirely upon what happened after Robert's death. Why does this seemingly careful plan collapse almost immediately? Because Ned continued assuming that law naturally outweighed preparation. Once Robert died, the written will held authority only if enough powerful people chose to enforce it. The royal treasury answered largely to Peter Baelish. The City Watch obeyed Janos Slynt, whose loyalty could be purchased. The Red Keep housed hundreds of Lannister guards, in addition to the Gold Cloaks, patrolling King's Landing. Renly Baratheon recognized the danger almost instantly. On the night before Robert died, he privately urged Ned to seize Joffrey, Tommen, Myrcella, and Cersei before dawn, placing the royal children under guard while proclaiming Stannis king. Ned refused. His refusal reveals one of the greatest contrasts between him and Cersei. He believed arresting children during the night resembled the methods of tyrants rather than honorable rulers. Renly cared less about appearances than outcomes. He understood that whoever controlled the royal family during those first uncertain hours would almost certainly control the succession itself. When Ned rejected the proposal, Renly fled the city with Sir Loras Tyrell and many household knights, riding south toward Highgarden before Cersei could move against him. One important ally disappeared because honor delayed action by only a few hours. Cersei, meanwhile, wasted no time at all. The queen immediately secured Joffrey's position inside the Red Keep. Tommen and Myrcella remained under Lannister protection. Her father, Tywin, still commanded enormous military strength from the Westerlands, even though he was far from the capital. More importantly, Cersei already understood something Ned had not yet accepted. Winning the throne required controlling people rather than merely possessing legal documents. Every messenger, captain, guardsman, steward, and court official suddenly mattered. Political authority in Westeros did not flow automatically from parchment sealed with wax. It flowed from swords willing to defend that parchment. This brings us to Petyr Baelish, perhaps the most misunderstood figure in this entire sequence of events. Many readers remember Littlefinger as the architect of Ned Stark's downfall, and certainly his betrayal proved decisive. Yet Baelish himself repeatedly insists that chaos creates opportunity. His loyalty belongs neither to House Lannister nor House Stark. Earlier, he manipulated Lysa Arryn into poisoning Jon Arryn. Later, he would betray Cersei whenever it suited his ambitions. During these critical days, however, his interests briefly aligned with hers. Ned accepted Littlefinger's promise that the City Watch could be bought. Cersei either anticipated or successfully encouraged the same outcome. The difference is not that one side possessed better information. It is that Cersei expected betrayal as a normal feature of politics, while Ned treated trust as the starting point of every relationship. The throne room confrontation unfolds almost quietly before exploding into history. Joffrey appears wearing the crown of the Seven Kingdoms. Cersei stands beside him in queenly splendor. Sir Barristan Selmy, the Kingsguard, members of the Small Council, and the assembled court gather to witness the transfer of power. Ned presents Robert's will and declares that Stannis Baratheon is the lawful heir. Cersei tears the document apart without hesitation. Then Littlefinger gives his famous order to the Gold Cloaks. Instead of arresting the queen, they turn their spears upon the Stark household guard. Within moments, steel rings across the throne room. Stark men fall dead upon the polished floor, and Eddard Stark finds a dagger pressed beneath his chin by the very man who had promised him support. The remarkable detail is not simply that Cersei wins this confrontation. It is how few moves she actually makes during the final moments. Weeks earlier, she'd already measured Robert's weaknesses. She had already secured Jaime's loyalty, trusted Lancel's obedience, relied upon Pycelle's quiet cooperation, and ensured that Joffrey would never willingly surrender his claim. She understood Janos Slynt's appetite for advancement and recognized that Littlefinger rarely chose the losing side. By the time Ned finally announced the truth, most of the game had already been played beyond public view. As the great doors of the throne room closed behind the prisoners and servants hurried to scrub blood from the marble, Cersei Lannister stood exactly where she had intended to stand all along, beside a crowned king who was, by law, no king at all, yet by power, ruler of the Seven Kingdoms. Why did Cersei emerge from the opening months of the War of the Five Kings stronger than many of the men commanding great armies across Westeros? Looking only at maps, the answer seems impossible. House Stark controlled the north and much of the Riverlands after stunning victories. Renly Baratheon gathered the power of the Reach and Stormlands beneath his banners. Stannis Baratheon held Dragonstone with the strongest legal claim. Balon Greyjoy declared himself King of the Isles and the North. Even Tywin Lannister found himself forced into difficult campaigns far from King's Landing, Yet while kings marched, fought, and died, Cersei remained seated at the center of the realm, where every raven, every rumor, and every decision eventually arrived. The war truly began before swords crossed on open fields. After Eddard Stark's imprisonment, his son Robb Stark summoned the banners of the North from Winterfell. Great houses answered one after another. House Umber rode from Last Hearth. House Karstark marched from Carhold. House Mormont crossed Bear Island. House Glover, House Serwyn, House Hornwood, House Tallheart, and many others gathered beneath the dire wolf banners. Catelyn Stark secured an alliance with House Tully through River Run, bringing the River Lords into the struggle after Tywin's armies had already invaded their lands. Lord Tywin himself dispatched Sir Gregor Clegane, Sir Amory Lorch, and other brutal captains into the Riverlands, burning villages and devastating harvests in an effort to draw Eddard Stark into open battle before Ned's arrest changed the entire political landscape. Robb Stark quickly demonstrated that youth did not prevent military brilliance. At the Whispering Wood, he surprised Sir Jaime Lannister, capturing him after a fierce night engagement beneath the trees outside River Run. Soon afterward came the Battle of the Camps, breaking the siege surrounding River Run and forcing Lannister forces into retreat. The victories transformed the young Lord of Winterfell into the king in the north after the northern lords and river lords acclaimed him inside River Run's great hall. Cersei immediately understood the danger. Robb did not merely command armies. He inspired loyalty powerful enough to revive a crown absent since Torrhen Stark knelt before Aegon the Conqueror nearly 3 centuries earlier. Yet Robb's victories created surprisingly little panic within the Red Keep. Why? Because Cersei recognized something that experienced rulers often understand instinctively. Winning battles and winning kingdoms are not the same achievement. Every mile Robb advanced carried him farther from Winterfell. Every castle he captured required garrisons. Every alliance demanded maintenance. Meanwhile, the Iron Throne still collected taxes from much of the Crownlands, retained the loyalty of numerous Crownlands houses, and continued issuing commands from the capital. Geography itself favored whoever occupied King's Landing. The city rested at the crossroads of politics, finance, and legitimacy. Lose a battlefield, and another army might still be raised. Lose the capital, and the appearance of lawful rule vanished almost overnight. Another threat soon emerged from the south. Renly Baratheon crowned himself king, despite standing behind his elder brother Stannis in the lawful order of succession. His support rested upon overwhelming military strength rather than legal argument. House Tyrell, led by Lord Mace Tyrell of Highgarden, joined Renly through the proposed marriage between Renly and Margaery Tyrell. The Reach contributed enormous wealth, fertile farmland, and perhaps the largest army in Westeros. Storm Lords flocked to Renly's colorful court at Bitterbridge, while singers celebrated tournaments and feasts. Contemporary estimates inside the novels suggest his combined host reached close to 100,000 men, vastly outnumbering every rival claimant. From King's Landing, such reports must have appeared terrifying. Cersei, nevertheless, understood Renly's greatest weakness before many others did. His claim rested almost entirely upon popularity. By every established law recognized throughout the Seven Kingdoms, Stannis remained Robert's rightful heir if Joffrey's legitimacy failed. Renly openly admitted as much, arguing instead that strength should determine kingship. It was a dangerous precedent. If younger brothers could simply gather larger armies and ignore inheritance, no noble succession in Westeros would ever remain secure again. Cersei had spent years studying noble ambitions. She knew alliances built upon convenience often fractured the moment circumstances changed. Those circumstances changed with astonishing speed. At Storm's End, Renly prepared to confront Stannis when death arrived in a manner that still unsettles readers today. In the novels, Catelyn Stark and Brienne of Tarth witness a shadow resembling Stannis Baratheon enter Renly's pavilion before dawn. The shadow slays Renly with a single stroke, while his guards stand helpless. Melisandre of Ashai later confirms that she birthed such shadow assassins through blood magic tied to Stannis himself. Martin deliberately leaves elements of the event mysterious, yet the consequences remain undeniable. Renly's magnificent host suddenly lost the king around whom its unity depended. Why does Renly's death matter so much for understanding Cersei's political intelligence? Because she immediately grasped what many commanders overlooked. Armies follow banners, but banners follow legitimacy, survival, and opportunity. The Reach did not disappear after Renly's assassination. Neither did its grain, gold, knights, nor castles. Those immense resources simply became available for someone else to claim. Lord Mace Tyrell and Lord Randall Tarly faced a difficult decision. Continue backing a dead king's memory, submit to Stannis, seek accommodation with Robb Stark, or negotiate with the Iron Throne. Every possibility carried enormous consequences. During these same months, another struggle unfolded inside King's Landing itself. Tyrion Lannister arrived as acting hand of the king after Tywin departed to command armies in the field. Their father understood that someone capable needed to govern the capital, while war consumed the Riverlands. Tyrion immediately clashed with Cersei. He dismissed Janos Slynt from command of the City Watch, sending him to the Wall after discovering his willingness to sell loyalty. He reorganized the Small Council, tested Varys, Littlefinger, and Pycelle through carefully planted false information, and exposed Pycelle as Cersei's confidential informant. For perhaps the first time since becoming queen, Cersei found herself sharing the capital with someone whose political instincts matched her own. Their rivalry reveals something fascinating about Cersei's mind. She never underestimated Tyrion's intelligence. She distrusted it. Since childhood, she associated Tyrion with the death of Joanna Lannister, a belief rooted in emotion rather than reason. Every clever move he made seemed to confirm that he represented a threat rather than an ally. Tyrion, in turn, recognized that Cersei often allowed pride and fear to distort otherwise sound judgment. Yet despite their hostility, both siblings pursued the same immediate objective: preserving Lannister control over the Iron Throne. Their methods differed sharply, but their interests temporarily aligned. While Tyrion strengthened the city's defenses, Cersei concentrated upon preserving royal authority. She managed the court, protected Joffrey's image despite his growing cruelty, maintained correspondence with powerful lords, and watched for signs that the Tyrells might reconsider their loyalties. Unlike commanders riding across muddy roads from castle to castle, she remained where every important decision eventually converged. Kings might clash upon the Green Fork beneath the walls of River Run or outside Storm's End, but the future of the realm still depended upon what happened inside the chambers of the Red Keep. As autumn deepened, ravens arrived almost daily, carrying news of fresh victories, fresh defeats, and fresh coronations. 5 different men now claimed crowns: Joffrey Baratheon in King's Landing, Robb Stark in the north, Balon Greyjoy upon the Iron Islands, Renly Baratheon until his sudden death, and Stannis Baratheon upon Dragonstone. From the outside, the 7 kingdoms seemed to be breaking into pieces, too numerous to mend, yet Cersei looked beyond the crowns themselves. She watched where grain flowed, where alliances shifted, which lords hesitated before choosing sides, and which victories cost more than they gained. Others counted battlefields. She counted what would remain after the battles were over. Why did the Battle of the Blackwater become the moment that permanently secured Cersei's position, even though she neither commanded the fleet nor led the armies that won it? On the surface, the glory belongs elsewhere. Histories celebrate Tyrion Lannister's wildfire, Lord Tywin's timely arrival, and the decisive charge of the Tyrell cavalry. Yet when the smoke cleared above Blackwater Bay, it was Cersei who remained beside the Iron Throne, with her son still wearing the crown. In politics, survival often matters more than personal heroics. Cersei understood that truth long before the battle began. By the middle of 299 AC, Stannis Baratheon represented the greatest immediate danger facing King's Landing. Renly's death had transformed him from a claimant with modest strength into the commander of much of the former Baratheon host. Although many Reach Lords abandoned Stannis after Renly's assassination, he still gathered a formidable army and, more importantly, a powerful fleet. Dragonstone had always served as a naval stronghold guarding the entrance to Blackwater Bay. Lord Montford Valerian brought the ships of Driftmark. Saladhor Saan, the famous Lysine pirate, joined Stannis with dozens of war galleys in exchange for promises of reward. As their sails filled the bay, King's Landing suddenly found itself threatened by both land and sea. Inside the capital, Tyrion acted with relentless energy. He strengthened the city walls, repaired neglected defenses, forged an enormous chain designed to stretch across the mouth of the Blackwater Rush, and secretly accumulated vast quantities of wildfire produced by the Alchemists' Guild. Wildfire itself had haunted the history of King's Landing for decades. King Aerys II had ordered thousands of hidden caches buried beneath streets, towers, and gates during the final madness of his reign, intending to burn the city rather than surrender it. Tyrion commissioned fresh stores rather than relying upon those dangerous remnants. Green, unnatural, and almost impossible to extinguish, wildfire promised devastation unlike any ordinary flame. Cersei watched these preparations with mixed confidence and anxiety. She trusted Tyrion's intelligence, but doubted his loyalty to her personally. At the same time, she increasingly questioned Joffrey's ability to behave like a king. The young monarch had inherited neither Robert's charisma nor Tywin's discipline. His cruelty toward Sansa Stark had already damaged royal prestige. His impulsive decisions frustrated experienced counselors. Cersei frequently intervened to soften the consequences of his recklessness, not because she objected to strength, but because she understood that fear without respect eventually breeds rebellion. A ruler must know when to terrify and when to reassure. Joffrey had not yet learned the difference. Why then does Cersei spend so much of the battle preparing not for victory, but for defeat? This detail often surprises readers returning to the novels. As Stannis' fleet approached, Cersei gathered noble women and high-born children inside Maegor's Holdfast, the strongest section of the Red Keep. Sansa Stark, several ladies of the court, Queen Alicent's ancient chambers, thick stone walls, and guarded gates all became part of an improvised refuge. Sir Elend Payne, the king's silent executioner, remained nearby carrying the greatsword Ice, taken from Eddard Stark after his execution. Cersei openly considered the possibility that if Stannis broke through the city, she would kill Tommen with her own hands, rather than allow him to be captured and humiliated by the enemy. That grim decision reveals something essential about her character. Cersei rarely separates political calculation from maternal instinct. To modern eyes, the idea of killing one's own child appears monstrous, yet inside the brutal logic of Westerosi succession, captured heirs become hostages, bargaining pieces, or public spectacles. Cersei remembered the murdered Targaryen children after the sack of King's Landing. She knew what victorious armies sometimes did when changing dynasties. Her readiness to spare Tommen from that fate sprang from love, twisted by relentless fear. The queen, who often appears ruthless towards strangers, becomes fiercely protective whenever her children stand in danger. Meanwhile, the battle unfolded outside with astonishing violence. Tyrion ordered the harbor chain raised after much of Stannis' fleet had already entered the river. At that precise moment, wildfire ignited among the trapped ships. Flames spread across the water itself, consuming vessels from Driftmark, Dragonstone, and Lys in an explosion remembered throughout the Seven Kingdoms. Green fire climbed into the night sky, while burning sailors leaped into a river that offered no safety because wildfire floated upon its surface. Even victorious defenders recoiled from the spectacle. Martin deliberately echoes the terrible legacy of Aerys's obsession with the substance, reminding readers that wildfire never truly belongs under human control. Yet Stannis Baratheon did not retreat. This fact deserves emphasis because it distinguishes him from nearly every other claimant. After losing much of his fleet, Stannis personally led the assault across the burning river. His soldiers forced their way onto the battered banks beneath the city walls. Siege towers rolled forward, ladders climbed toward the battlements. The king himself fought with sword in hand despite the chaos surrounding him. Even Tyrion privately acknowledged Stannis' extraordinary determination. If courage alone determined kingship, few rivals could equal him. During these desperate hours, Tyrion rode out through the King's Gate, leading a sortie against Stannis' forces. His attack temporarily disrupted the assault, but nearly cost him his life. Sir Mandon Moore of the Kingsguard unexpectedly turned upon Tyrion during the fighting, attempting to murder him before Podrick Payne intervened and killed Moore. The reasons behind Mandon's betrayal remain one of the unresolved mysteries in the novels. Many readers suspect Peter Baelish arranged it. Others point towards Cersei, though the books never confirm such involvement. Martin leaves the question deliberately open, another reminder that political assassinations often hide behind the confusion of battle. Why does the outcome ultimately belong to Tywin rather than Stannis? Because alliances matured while armies marched. Earlier, Petyr Baelish had traveled to Bitterbridge as the Iron Throne's envoy after Renly's death. There he negotiated the extraordinary agreement between House Lannister and House Tyrell. King Joffrey's previous betrothal to Sansa Stark would eventually be set aside.
Instead, Joffrey would marry Margaery Tyrell, binding the richest agricultural region in Westeros to the crown. Lord Mace Tyrell accepted. Lord Randall Tarly marched beside him. Their combined strength joined Tywin Lannister's host, moving rapidly toward King's Landing. The relief force struck Stannis at precisely the right moment. Tywin crossed the river with fresh troops, while Sir Garland Tyrell, wearing Renly's famous armor, according to the novels, advanced beneath banners that caused confusion among Stannis' men. In darkness and exhaustion, many soldiers believed Renly himself had returned from the dead. Whether superstition or battlefield uncertainty mattered more, the effect proved devastating. Stannis' exhausted army collapsed beneath the combined assault. Those who could fled toward the remaining ships. Others surrendered or died beneath the walls they had nearly captured. When dawn finally rose over Blackwater Bay, smoke drifted above shattered masts and blackened water, where wildfires still smoldered in isolated patches. The bells of King's Landing rang in celebration, the small folk poured into the streets, and the Iron Throne remained firmly in Lannister hands. Songs would later praise Tyrion, Tywin, or the gallantry of famous knights, though not always accurately. Cersei understood something quieter. Every enemy who had marched against her now faced fresh setbacks, while the alliance with House Tyrell promised strength greater than any the crown had possessed since Robert's rebellion. She had not won the battle with sword or fire, but she recognized victory immediately when it arrived, and she was already thinking beyond the smoke toward the next contest that awaited the queen who had survived yet another king's war. Why did the death of Joffrey Baratheon strengthen Cersei's determination instead of breaking her authority? Most rulers never recover from the public murder of an heir, especially when it happens in the middle of a royal celebration surrounded by hundreds of witnesses. Yet Cersei responded not by withdrawing from power, but by tightening her grip upon it. Grief consumed her, certainly, but grief and political instinct moved together rather than separately. To understand Cersei after the Purple Wedding, you must first understand that she no longer believed the world contained accidents. Every tragedy looked to her like another move made by unseen enemies. The wedding feast joined House Baratheon and House Tyrell through the marriage of King Joffrey and Margaery Tyrell. It took place within the Red Keep after months of careful preparation. Lords from across the Seven Kingdoms filled the hall. Musicians performed beneath banners displaying crowned stags, golden roses, and crimson lions. Gigantic pies released living doves into the air. Jugglers, singers, and dwarfs provided entertainment intended to display royal magnificence. Politically, the celebration announced that the alliance forged after the Blackwater had become permanent. For House Lannister, the marriage secured the wealth and harvests of the Reach. For House Tyrell, it brought the influence that came from placing their daughter beside the Iron Throne. Instead, the feast became one of the most infamous murders in Westerosi history. While drinking wine during the wedding celebration, King Joffrey suddenly began coughing violently. His face darkened, his breathing failed, and within moments he collapsed before the assembled court. In the confusion that followed, Cersei rushed to her son's side as Grand Maester Pycelle attempted desperately to help him. Nothing succeeded. Joffrey Baratheon, crowned king while still a boy, died in his mother's arms before half the feast had ended. Martin deliberately surrounds the poisoning with confusion because that confusion becomes part of the political weapon itself. Cersei does not pause to examine evidence. She immediately accuses Tyrion Lannister, who had publicly argued with Joffrey only moments before the king's collapse. Sansa Stark disappears from the castle amid the chaos, secretly aided by Ser Dontos Hollard under instructions from Peter Baelish. Much later, the novels reveal that Olenna Tyrell almost certainly removed the poisoned crystal from Sansa's hairnet and slipped it into Joffrey's wine, acting in concert with Littlefinger. Their motives differed. Baelish sought disorder. Olenna sought to prevent Margaery from remaining married to a dangerously cruel king. Cersei never accepts that explanation because accepting it would require admitting that trusted allies had outplayed her. Why did Cersei cling so fiercely to Tyrion's guilt, despite mounting contradictions? On the surface, the accusation made sense. Tyrion had quarreled openly with Joffrey. He possessed opportunity. He'd often spoken critically of the young king's behavior. Yet Cersei's certainty existed long before the trial began. Years of resentment shaped her judgment. Since Joanna Lannister's death in childbirth, Cersei had associated Tyrion with misfortune. Every political disagreement between them reinforced that old wound. The murder simply completed a pattern she already believed existed. Once again, emotion quietly replaced investigation. The trial that followed exposed another fascinating contrast between Cersei and her father. Tywin Lannister presided as Hand of the King, determined above all to preserve royal authority. Witnesses appeared one after another describing Tyrion's sharp tongue, his disputes with Joffrey, and his suspicious behavior during the feast. Some testimony reflected genuine observation. Much of it reflected careful selection by the prosecution. Cersei encouraged every accusation that strengthened the case. Tywin, by comparison, seemed more interested in producing a politically useful conviction than in satisfying personal hatred. He saw Tyrion as a troublesome son whose removal might simplify succession at Casterly Rock. Cersei saw the man she believed had murdered her child. Then came Oberyn Martell, the Red Viper of Dorne. His arrival in King's Landing carried wounds far older than Joffrey's death. During the sack of King's Landing at the end of Robert's Rebellion, Sir Gregor Clegane had murdered Oberyn's sister, Princess Elia Martell, along with her children. Dorne had never forgotten. Oberyn came ostensibly to attend the royal wedding, but everyone understood that vengeance traveled with him. When Tyrion demanded trial by combat rather than accepting condemnation, Oberyn unexpectedly volunteered to serve as his champion. The duel that followed against Ser Gregor became one of the most unforgettable confrontations in the novels. Cersei watched as justice and vengeance collided beneath the walls of the Red Keep. Oberyn fought brilliantly, dancing around Gregor's immense strength with speed and poisoned spear. Again and again he demanded a confession concerning Elia's murder. Finally, victory seemed within reach. Then a single mistake changed everything. Gregor seized Oberyn, crushed his skull with monstrous force and confessed to killing Elia only moments before collapsing from the poison-coating Oberyn's weapon. Tyrion lost the trial. Gregor himself lingered near death, beginning the strange path that would eventually produce Sir Robert Strong. Cersei gained the verdict she desired, but not the certainty she believed it would bring. Why does this period reveal both Cersei's brilliance and her greatest blind spot? Because she recognized danger almost instantly, yet repeatedly misidentified its source. She correctly sensed that powerful enemies surrounded House Lannister. She understood that every alliance concealed private ambitions. She appreciated that smiling courtiers often hid sharper knives than open foes. What she failed to recognize was that her attention fixed upon familiar rivals while others quietly shaped events beyond her sight. Peter Baelish departed King's Landing richer and more influential than ever. Olenna Tyrell strengthened her granddaughter's position. Varys continued collecting secrets. Cersei, however, devoted nearly all her energy to destroying Tyrion. Tyrion's escape from the Black Cells deepened that obsession beyond repair. Assisted by Jaime Lannister, who could no longer bear seeing his brother executed, Tyrion fled through hidden passages beneath the Red Keep. There he encountered his father, Lord Tywin, in the Tower of the Hand. The confrontation ended with Tywin's death, struck by quarrels from Joffrey's own crossbow, while seated upon the privy. Before reaching Tywin, Tyrion also killed Shae, whose testimony at the trial had devastated him. By sunrise, the hand of the king lay dead. Tyrion had vanished across the narrow sea with Varys, and the most formidable political mind House Lannister possessed had disappeared forever. For Cersei, Tywin's death changed the structure of the realm almost as profoundly as Joffrey's. Her father had always represented an unshakable foundation, even when they argued. His authority restrained ambitious bannermen, intimidated rivals, and balanced the competing personalities within House Lannister itself. Without him, the Queen no longer shared power with the strongest lord in Westeros. She believed she had inherited his position as naturally as his blood. Standing beside the silent bier where Lord Tywin Lannister was prepared for burial, surrounded by incense that struggled to conceal the decay already beginning beneath the gilded armor, Cersei convinced herself that the lion had not truly fallen. His strength, she believed, now belonged entirely to her. Why did Cersei choose to arm one of the few institutions powerful enough to challenge the Iron Throne itself? At first glance, the decision seems impossible to defend. Every educated noble in Westeros understood the history of the faith militant. Centuries earlier, warrior sons and poor fellows had fought kings, resisted dragons, and forced even House Targaryen into costly compromises before King Jaehaerys I finally reached a lasting settlement with the faith. Those military orders had remained dissolved for generations. Yet after Tywin's death, Cersei herself reopened the door that history had carefully closed. To understand why, we must first understand the enemies she believed surrounded her. King Tommen Baratheon now wore the crown, though he was still only a child. Gentle by temperament, courteous almost to a fault, Tommen differed from Joffrey in nearly every visible way. He enjoyed kittens, lessons with Sir Loras Tyrell, and simple games far more than displays of authority. The realm found him easier to love, but that very kindness also made him easier to influence. Cersei regarded every smiling advisor as a potential thief attempting to steal her son from her. Marguerite Tyrell spent increasing amounts of time beside the young king. Queen Dowager Olenna remained close at hand. Sir Loras joined the Kingsguard. The Tyrell family seemed to be placing roots throughout the Red Keep, one careful appointment at a time. Many of Cersei's concerns were not entirely imaginary. House Tyrell had indeed emerged from the Blackwater as the crown's indispensable ally. Highgarden supplied grain desperately needed after years of war. The Reach's enormous harvest prevented famine inside King's Landing. Lord Mace Tyrell sought positions on the small council, while his relatives acquired influence through marriages and military commands. From Cersei's perspective, the Lannisters had survived Stannis Baratheon only to discover that their rescuers intended to become indispensable partners in government. She increasingly interpreted cooperation as quiet conquest. Why does Cersei repeatedly underestimate Marguerite Tyrell despite recognizing her political importance? The answer lies partly inside Maggie the Frog's prophecy. The younger, more beautiful queen promised by the woods, which had haunted Cersei since childhood. Every gracious smile from Marguerite became another reminder of those ancient words. Every conversation between Tommen and his new bride seemed to confirm that the prophecy had begun unfolding at last. The novels never state that Marguerite consciously attempted to replace Cersei as the dominant influence over the king. What matters is that Cersei believed she did. Once again, perception shaped policy as powerfully as objective reality. At the same time, another figure rose to extraordinary prominence among the small folk of King's Landing. The High Septon who had occupied the Great Sept after the Blackwater died, leaving the faith to select a successor. The new High Septon proved unlike the wealthy prelates many nobles expected. Known simply as the High Sparrow, he lived with striking humility, walked barefoot through the city, tended the sick, and preached against corruption among both nobles and clergy. Thousands of common people admired him. The devastation left by years of war made his message especially powerful. Burned villages, starving refugees, broken septs, and ruined harvests had created fertile ground for a leader who spoke of justice rather than privilege. Cersei observed this movement through the familiar lens of opportunity. The Iron Throne owed the faith an enormous debt, accumulated during Robert Baratheon's reign and expanded further during the War of the Five Kings. Repayment appeared nearly impossible given the crown's financial exhaustion. Pater Baelish had long concealed the kingdom's true fiscal condition through loans from House Lannister, the faith itself, and especially the Iron Bank of Braavos. Cersei believed she had found an elegant solution if she restored the ancient military orders of the faith, granting the High Sparrow authority to arm devoted believers once more. The faith would forgive much of the crown's debt in return. The arrangement looked brilliant on parchment. The Iron Throne gained financial relief without surrendering territory. The faith regained ancient privileges it had sought for centuries. Cersei also expected the newly armed faith to investigate her political enemies, particularly Marguerite Tyrell. By directing suspicion toward the Tyrells, she hoped to weaken the family that increasingly dominated Tommen's household. In purely short-term political terms, the strategy displayed genuine creativity. Instead of confronting the Reach militarily, she sought to employ religion as a counterweight to secular ambition. Why then did everything unravel so quickly? Because Cersei misunderstood one essential principle. Institutions possess ambitions of their own. The High Sparrow accepted royal concessions, but he never became the Queen's servant. His loyalty belonged to the Seven rather than the Iron Throne. Once the faith militant existed again, its members began investigating sin wherever they believed it resided. Noble birth offered no protection. Wealth carried little influence. Even queens stood beneath divine judgment if the faith concluded they had violated sacred law. Cersei expected obedient allies. She had instead revived an independent power that answered only to its own conscience. The investigation into Margaery initially appeared to justify Cersei's confidence. Witnesses emerged accusing the young queen of improper relationships with several men before and after her marriage. The precise reliability of those accusations remains questionable within the novels, especially given the willingness of certain informants to shape testimony for political advantage. Nevertheless, the faith arrested Margaery Tyrell along with several of her cousins. Cersei privately celebrated. The prophecy, she believed, had finally been defeated through careful planning rather than brute force. Her greatest rival now occupied a cell beneath the Great Sept instead of a place beside Tommen. Then the questions turned unexpectedly toward the Queen herself. Moonboy's name surfaced. So did Sir Osmond Kettleblack's. The Kettleblack brothers had entered royal service largely through Littlefinger's earlier patronage before Cersei attempted to make them instruments of her own designs. She ordered Sir Osney Kettleblack to seduce Queen Margaery and later confess the fabricated affair to the faith. Instead, once imprisoned, Osney admitted not to relations with Margaery, but to his own intimate involvement with Cersei herself. Whether every detail reflected truth, coercion, or desperate self-preservation, the confession shattered the careful wall separating accusation from the accuser. Why did Cersei fail to anticipate this reversal when she'd anticipated so many others throughout her life? The answer reveals the subtle difference between intelligence and self-awareness. She excelled at identifying other people's weaknesses. She recognized vanity in Mace Tyrell, ambition in Littlefinger, calculation in Varys, and rigid honor in Eddard Stark. Yet she increasingly overlooked her own vulnerabilities. She assumed that those serving her feared her enough to remain loyal forever. She believed secrets remained secure because she commanded them. She forgot that fear weakens rapidly once prison doors close and torture begins. The same political tools she had used against rivals now stood ready to be used against her. When the faith finally arrested Queen Dowager Cersei Lannister, the event stunned King's Landing more profoundly than many battles had. The daughter of Tywin Lannister, widow of Robert Baratheon, mother of 2 kings, and the most powerful woman in the realm, found herself confined inside a simple cell beneath the Great Sept. Stone walls replaced royal chambers. Bare floors replaced carved furniture. Septas questioned her relentlessly, while the bells above marked the passing hours. For the first time since she had entered the Red Keep as a young bride, Cersei confronted an enemy she could neither bribe nor intimidate, and in the silence beneath the Sept, she began discovering that even the smartest player can misjudge the rules of a game after changing them herself. Why do so many readers remember the Walk of Atonement as proof of Cersei's weakness, when it may also reveal the deepest source of her resilience? Few moments in all of A Song of Ice and Fire are as emotionally devastating. The proud daughter of Tywin Lannister, once surrounded by Kingsguard servants and banners, emerged from the Great Sept, stripped of jewels, rank, and every visible symbol of power. The small folk she had ruled now stood only a few feet away, free to mock, spit, curse, and throw filth. Yet Martin does not end her story there. Instead, he transforms humiliation into another turning point, one that fundamentally changes the woman who returns to the Red Keep. Cersei's imprisonment beneath the Great Sept had already begun breaking many of the assumptions she carried throughout her life. The High Sparrow refused luxury. He refused bribes. He refused threats. Septas questioned her daily regarding adultery, incest, the deaths of King Robert and King Joffrey, and countless other accusations. Food remained sparse. Sleep became uncertain. Time itself lost its familiar rhythm beneath stone ceilings where only distant bells marked the passing hours. The queen, who had once controlled audiences, councils, and ceremonies, suddenly possessed authority over almost nothing beyond her own thoughts. The confessions she eventually offered require careful reading. Cersei admitted to adultery with several men after Robert Baratheon's death, including Sir Osmond Kettleblack. She deliberately stopped short of confessing the central accusation, incest with Jaime Lannister and the true parentage of Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen. This distinction mattered enormously. The High Sparrow accepted partial confession because it allowed legal proceedings to continue while granting Cersei temporary release pending trial. She surrendered enough truth to escape the cell without sacrificing the foundation upon which her children's legitimacy still rested. Even cornered, she calculated every word. Why did the High Sparrow permit such a compromise at all? Because the faith sought justice that appeared lawful rather than arbitrary. Throughout the novels, the High Sparrow consistently insists that kings and queens stand equal before the Seven. Public procedure strengthened that claim. If Cersei completed an act of public penance, then faced formal judgment afterward, the faith demonstrated confidence rather than vengeance. To many nobles, this seemed astonishing restraint. To the High Sparrow, it reinforced the authority of the gods over every earthly crown. Cersei understood none of this as mercy. She saw only another battlefield, where symbols mattered as much as swords. The Walk of Atonement itself unfolds with relentless simplicity. Cersei must walk barefoot from the Great Sept of Baelor to the Red Keep. Every ornament is removed. Her golden hair, long associated with Lannister pride and beauty, is cut away by the Silent Sisters until only uneven stubble remains. The bells begin to ring. Behind her walks Septa Unella, repeating one word again and again, shame. Before her stretches the long climb across King's Landing, through streets she'd viewed for years, only from palace windows and balconies. Martin lingers not upon spectacle, but upon physical sensation. Sharp stones cut bare feet, already weakened by imprisonment. Mud clings to bruised skin. The autumn air chills her exposed body. Crowds gather from every district of King's Landing. Bakers abandon ovens, fishermen leave the riverfront, apprentices crowd rooftops, and beggars press toward the procession. Some weep in pity, others laugh openly. Rotten vegetables strike her shoulders, human waste splashes against her legs, The queen who once inspired fear now discovers how quickly ordinary people reclaim power when a ruler can no longer command punishment. Yet something unexpected happens during those endless streets. Cersei refuses to collapse. She stumbles repeatedly. She nearly loses consciousness more than once. But she continues walking. Memory replaces fear. She thinks of Joanna. She thinks of Joffrey. She thinks of Tywin and of Jaime. Hatred, grief, humiliation, and determination merge into a single resolve. The city witnesses not merely the breaking of a queen, but the hardening of one. By the time the gates of the Red Keep finally come into view, the woman crossing the drawbridge is no longer the same woman who entered the Great Sept weeks earlier. Why does this transformation matter politically? Because humiliation often destroys legitimacy only when it destroys confidence as well. Cersei loses neither. She never accepts the faith's moral judgment, even while submitting outwardly to its demands. Instead, she concludes that mercy, compromise, and hesitation created the disaster in the first place. From that moment forward, her thinking grows even sharper in one direction and narrower in another. She becomes increasingly convinced that decisive force solves problems more effectively than negotiation. The experience teaches resilience while simultaneously stripping away caution. Waiting beyond the gates stands one of the strangest figures in the later novels. Sir Robert Strong arrives in brilliant white armor, silent, towering above every knight nearby. Officially, he is introduced by Qyburn as a new champion of the Kingsguard. His visor never rises. He neither eats nor drinks in public. No one hears him speak. Qyburn, formerly a maester stripped of his chain for conducting forbidden experiments upon living subjects, insists that vows prevent Sir Robert from revealing his face. Many characters and many readers conclude that this mysterious knight is in fact Sir Gregor Clegane, somehow preserved after Oberyn Martell's poisoned spear. The novels have not confirmed this outright, but Martin layers enough clues to make the possibility difficult to ignore. Qyburn himself deserves closer attention because Cersei recognizes value in people others reject. Expelled from the Citadel for pursuing knowledge considered monstrous, he possesses no noble birth, no great army, and no famous lineage. What he offers is absolute loyalty. Unlike Pycelle, he never lectures. Unlike Varys, he conceals no competing agenda that Cersei can detect. Unlike the Tyrells, he asks for no marriage alliance or political office beyond what she grants him. Cersei elevates him to the office of Master of Whisperers after Varys disappears. It is another example of her unconventional eye for talent. She repeatedly notices capable outsiders whom more traditional rulers dismiss. When Cersei finally reaches her own chambers once more, King's Landing continues its ordinary rhythms outside the castle walls. Merchants still bargain in Fishmonger's Square, bells still ring from the septs, ravens still depart the rookery carrying news across the Seven Kingdoms. Yet inside the Red Keep, something essential has shifted. The queen, who once believed influence alone could secure power, now believes survival belongs only to those willing to remove every obstacle completely. Her trial before the faith still lies ahead. So does the unresolved struggle with House Tyrell, as servants quietly trim the last uneven strands of her shorn hair, and armor-clad Sir Robert stands silently beyond the chamber door.
Cersei begins planning not how to recover what she has lost, but how to ensure that no one will ever force her to walk those streets again. Why do so many discussions about Cersei's intelligence become confused by events that have not yet happened in the novels? The answer lies in the existence of two different endings. George R.R. Martin's written story pauses at the close of A Dance with Dragons, while the television adaptation continues far beyond that point, giving Cersei a complete political arc that the books have not yet reached. If we wish to judge her fairly, we must keep those paths separate. The novels present a queen awaiting trial, rebuilding her influence after humiliation, and preparing for another contest with the Faith and the Tyrells. The television series, by contrast, imagines what that struggle might become, offering one possible destination rather than established written canon. The divergence begins immediately after Cersei returns to the Red Keep. In the books, King Tommen still reigns. Margaery Tyrell has also been released from immediate confinement and likewise awaits trial before the Faith. Both queens stand accused, yet neither case has reached its conclusion. The High Sparrow continues exercising extraordinary influence over King's Landing, while Lord Mace Tyrell grows increasingly impatient with the slow machinery of religious justice. Kevin Lannister recently returned to court, attempts to restore stability by balancing Lannister and Tyrell interests instead of allowing either family complete control. Kevin's role deserves far more attention than it often receives. Younger brother to Tywin Lannister, Kevin spent decades serving loyally without seeking glory for himself. He commanded armies during the War of the Five Kings, advised Tywin with practical good sense, and rarely allowed pride to cloud his judgment. When he finally accepted the office of regent in hand for young King Tommen, he immediately began reversing several of Cersei's earlier appointments. He dismissed unreliable favorites, strengthened cooperation with House Tyrell, restored experienced officials to important positions, and quietly repaired relationships damaged by months of political suspicion. His government lacked spectacle, but it possessed something Westeros desperately needed after years of civil war: competence. Why then does Kevan Lannister die at precisely the moment his reforms begin succeeding? Martin provides one of the clearest answers in the epilogue of A Dance with Dragons. Varys, long absent from King's Landing, secretly returns through hidden passages beneath the Red Keep. He murders Grand Maester Pycelle with a crossbow bolt, then kills Kevin Lannister in the Tower of the Hand. Before leaving, Varys explains his reasoning with chilling honesty. Peace, effective government, and reconciliation among the great houses would make the realm too stable. He requires continued chaos because another claimant, young Aegon, presented as Prince Aegon Targaryen, son of Rhaegar, has landed in Westeros and needs a divided kingdom to conquer. That revelation changes the political landscape entirely. Throughout the earlier novels, Varys often appears to serve the stability of the realm above personal ambition. The epilogue reveals a far more complicated objective. Whether young Aegon is truly Rhaegar's surviving son or an impostor, descended from House Blackfyre remains one of the great unresolved questions of the series. Many readers support the so-called Blackfyre theory, pointing to clues involving the Golden Company, Illyrio Mopatis, and the words spoken by Varys himself. Martin has deliberately withheld confirmation. What matters for Cersei's story is simpler.
Another highly capable player has entered the game, one she does not yet fully understand. Meanwhile, in the television adaptation, events move along a dramatically different road. There, Cersei abandons any attempt at legal or religious compromise. She uses hidden caches of wildfire beneath King's Landing, many originally buried under the orders of King Aerys II, to destroy the Great Sept of Baelor in a single catastrophic explosion. The blast kills the High Sparrow, Queen Margaery Tyrell, Lord Mace Tyrell, Sir Loras Tyrell, Kevin Lannister, and countless nobles, septons, and small folk gathered for trial. The sequence is visually unforgettable, but it belongs to the adaptation rather than Martin's published canon. No equivalent event has occurred in the novels. Why has that scene become so central to discussions of Cersei's intelligence? Because it captures both the brilliance and the danger of her political philosophy in its most extreme form. The television version of Cersei identifies every major obstacle and removes all of them at once. No prolonged negotiation follows. No rival survives to challenge her authority inside the capital. The strategy succeeds immediately because it replaces complicated politics with overwhelming force. Yet the same act also destroys institutions that monarchs traditionally depend upon: the faith, respected noble houses, public legitimacy, and confidence that the capital remains a place governed by law rather than fear. The books suggest a more complicated future. Cersei expects to defend herself through trial by combat, and with Sir Robert Strong standing as her champion, few opponents seem eager to face him. At the same time, House Tyrell still commands enormous military strength in the Reach. The Faith militant remains active. Dorne advances its own interests after the death of Prince Oberyn. Across the Narrow Sea, Daenerys Targaryen possesses 3 living dragons. In the Stormlands, young Aegon's invasion gathers momentum. Rather than simplifying the political board, Martin steadily adds new pieces until every claimant must confront multiple crises simultaneously. This difference between book and adaptation helps illuminate Cersei herself. She rarely fails because she lacks intelligence. More often she fails because she assigns absolute priority to defeating the nearest visible threat. Once an enemy enters her field of vision, every other concern begins fading into the background. We have seen this pattern before. Tyrion becomes the sole explanation for Joffrey's death. Margaery becomes the living embodiment of Maggie's prophecy. The faith appears useful until it becomes dangerous. In each case, her initial analysis contains genuine insight, but her focus narrows until she overlooks the wider board. Even so, dismissing Cersei as merely reckless ignores the extraordinary number of times her instincts prove correct. She recognizes Littlefinger's ambition long before many others appreciate its scale, even if she never fully controls him. She distrusts Varys, and history vindicates that suspicion. She correctly understands that noble alliances are often temporary arrangements rather than lasting friendships. She knows the Tyrells intend to expand their influence through Tommen. She senses the power gravitates toward those willing to act while others continue debating. Again and again, her first reading of people is remarkably sharp. The tragedy is the certainty often prevents her from revising those judgments when circumstances change. As evening settles over King's Landing once more, the towers of the Red Keep cast long shadows across Aegon's high hill. Somewhere beneath those stones lie forgotten passages used by Varys, hidden wildfire left from Aerys's reign, and the silent chambers where queens, hands, and kings once believed they controlled the future. Cersei Lannister walks those same halls convinced that survival belongs to the boldest mind in the room. She is often right. Yet in Martin's world, the game never pauses when one player believes she has finally understood all of its rules. Why has Cersei Lannister come to symbolize political failure when so many of her conclusions about the people around her were actually correct? It is one of the most fascinating paradoxes in Martin's entire saga. Readers often remember the mistakes because the mistakes are dramatic, public, and costly. They remember the restoration of the Faith Militant, the conflict with the Tyrells, or her relentless hatred of Tyrion. Far fewer stop to notice how often Cersei identifies genuine threats long before anyone else. Intelligence is not simply the ability to arrive at the right answer. Sometimes it is the ability to ask the right question before everyone else realizes there is one. Consider Petyr Baelish. From his first appearances, many characters underestimate him because he possesses no ancient castle, commands no great army, and descends from only a minor house upon the fingers. Eddard Stark initially treats him as an irritating but useful court official. Lords joke about his birth. Even Tywin Lannister rarely seems to view him as a rival, equal to the great houses. Cersei never fully trusts him. She recognizes that Littlefinger speaks differently depending upon his audience, enjoys creating obligations through debt, and rarely reveals his complete intentions. She cannot control him, and she certainly misjudges how dangerous he will become, but her instinct that he represents a long-term threat proves entirely justified. The same pattern appears with Varys. The spider presents himself as a humble servant devoted only to the peace of the realm. He smiles easily, speaks softly, and avoids public displays of power. Many rulers find that reassuring. Cersei does not. She repeatedly questions why a man who knows every secret in Westeros should possess no ambitions of his own. She cannot uncover his connection to Illyrio Mopatis, the Golden Company, or young Aegon, but she correctly senses that information itself is his greatest weapon. The epilogue of A Dance with Dragons confirms her deepest suspicion. Varys serves a plan far older than the immediate survival of House Lannister. Why then do these accurate instincts fail to produce lasting success? Because Cersei increasingly mistakes recognition for mastery. Identifying an enemy and defeating that enemy require different abilities. She sees Littlefinger's ambition, but still allows him opportunities to expand it. She distrusts Varys without ever dismantling his network of little birds. She understands that House Tyrell seeks influence, yet answers subtle political pressure with increasingly direct confrontation. Her perception remains remarkably sharp. Her execution grows steadily less flexible. The qualities that once made her dangerous gradually become rigid habits. This distinction becomes even clearer when comparing Cersei with Tywin Lannister. Father and daughter share undeniable similarities. Both believe appearances shape political reality. Both value family prestige above personal happiness. Both understand that fear can become an effective instrument of rule when carefully controlled. Yet Tywin almost always separates personal emotion from public policy. He despises Tyrion personally, while still appointing him acting hand because the realm requires capable leadership. He negotiates with the Tyrells despite years of rivalry because circumstances demand cooperation. Cersei finds such separation far more difficult. Once emotion enters a political problem, it steadily becomes the political problem. That difference does not make her foolish. It makes her profoundly human. Martin repeatedly avoids creating perfect strategists. Tywin underestimates the emotional damage inflicted upon his own children and dies believing absolute authority still protects him. Tyrion often wins arguments while losing relationships. Stannis Baratheon sacrifices affection for justice until justice itself becomes isolated. Robb Stark triumphs in battle, but cannot escape the consequences of breaking his marriage pact with House Frey. Every remarkable political figure carries a blind spot matching his or her greatest strength. Cersei's is certainty. Once convinced she has understood another person's motives, she rarely revises that conclusion. Why does gender remain central to any honest assessment of Cersei's career? Because Westeros consistently limits women even when they demonstrate extraordinary ability. Tywin educates Cersei in matters of governance, yet never seriously contemplates naming her heir to Casterly Rock while Jaime remains alive. The laws of inheritance favor sons. Great councils consist overwhelmingly of men. Military command belongs almost exclusively to male nobles. Cersei spends her entire life navigating structures designed to exclude her from formal authority. She therefore learns to exercise influence indirectly through marriage, motherhood, court appointments, patronage, and private conversation. Those methods often appear less visible than battlefield victories, yet they shape kingdoms all the same. This does not excuse every decision she makes. Martin never invites readers to overlook cruelty simply because circumstances are difficult. Cersei orders executions. She lies repeatedly. She manipulates allies and enemies alike. Innocent people suffer because of choices she consciously makes. At the same time, Martin refuses to reduce her to a simple villain. He allows us inside her thoughts, where fear, love, ambition, prophecy, pride, and genuine intelligence collide constantly. Few rulers in the novels receive such intimate psychological treatment. By granting readers access to her reasoning, he transforms even disastrous decisions into understandable ones. One important contrast illustrates this complexity. Eddard Stark dies because he assumes honorable conduct will inspire honorable responses. Cersei survives because she assumes exactly the opposite. Neither worldview proves sufficient by itself. Ned underestimates deception. Cersei underestimates trust. The realm punishes both. Martin rarely rewards characters for embracing one absolute philosophy. Instead, survival usually belongs to those capable of adapting without surrendering their essential nature. Cersei changes tactics many times, but she never escapes the conviction that power exists primarily to prevent others from hurting the people she calls her own. Even Maggie the Frog's prophecy acquires a different meaning when viewed across Cersei's entire life. Readers naturally focus upon its apparent accuracy. A king becomes her husband. 3 children wear golden crowns. Death follows each of them. A younger queen enters her life. Yet another possibility quietly remains. The prophecy never commands Cersei to make any particular decision. It offers predictions, not instructions. Again and again, she chooses responses based upon those words. She distrusts Margaery because she expects betrayal. She clings more fiercely to power because she fears losing it. The prophecy may foretell events, but Cersei herself determines how she meets them. Night settles once again over the Red Keep. Torches flicker along the curtain walls, while the city below gradually falls silent after another uncertain day. Ravens sleep within the rookery. Guards pace familiar paths beside ancient battlements raised by Aegon the Conqueror's descendants. Somewhere inside those halls walks a queen remembered by many as reckless, by others as ruthless, and by a few as one of the sharpest political minds Westeros ever produced. Whether history ultimately condemns or admires her may depend less upon the victories she won than upon who survives long enough to write the final chronicle. Why does history so often remember winners more kindly than thinkers, even when the thinkers understood the game more clearly? It is the final question lingering over Cersei Lannister's story. Many rulers in Westeros achieve brief victories through overwhelming force or simple good fortune. Far fewer spend an entire lifetime studying power itself, how families rise, why kingdoms fracture, what fear accomplishes, and where loyalty truly begins. Cersei belongs to that smaller group. Whether she ultimately succeeds is one question. Whether she understood the nature of political struggle better than many of her contemporaries is another entirely. George R.R. Martin has always treated history as something written by imperfect observers rather than by impartial truth. Fire and Blood demonstrates this repeatedly through conflicting accounts from Septon Eustace, Mushroom, and Grandmaster Munkin. The world of Ice and Fire often presents events through the assumptions of maesters serving particular kings. Even recent history inside the main novels depends upon whose memories survive. If Cersei eventually falls, her enemies will naturally emphasize her arrogance, cruelty, and mistakes. If House Lannister somehow preserves its power, different chroniclers may highlight her endurance during the War of the Five Kings, her refusal to surrender the capital, and her ability to navigate dangers that destroyed kings, hands, and rival queens alike. One comparison quietly echoes throughout the novels. Tywin Lannister is almost universally acknowledged as one of the greatest political figures of his age, despite decisions that leave profound scars upon Westeros. The Red Wedding destroys trust between great houses. The brutal devastation of the Riverlands creates generations of suffering. His treatment of Tyrion helps shape tragedies extending far beyond his own death. Yet history inside the novels often remembers Tywin first for restoring Lannister power. Cersei commits grave errors of her own, but readers frequently judge them through a harsher emotional lens. The contrast invites an uncomfortable question. Had Cersei been born male, commanding armies instead of court alliances, would her ambition have inspired admiration rather than condemnation? The novels themselves never provide a simple answer because Martin rarely writes simple people. Cersei can be compassionate toward her children and merciless toward strangers in the same chapter. She recognizes manipulation while becoming trapped by prophecy. She displays extraordinary courage during moments of crisis, yet allows fear to govern quieter decisions. Her intelligence remains genuine, so do her flaws. They cannot be separated because each grows from the same root. The confidence allowing her to challenge powerful men is also the confidence preventing her from accepting correction when she is wrong. Why then does Cersei continue fascinating readers
long after so many kings have passed into memory, because she never accepts the role assigned to her. Westeros expects queens to produce heirs, arrange marriages, host feasts, and quietly reinforce dynasties created by fathers, husbands, and sons. Cersei attempts something far more ambitious. She seeks not merely to influence rulers, but to become the central political force herself. Sometimes she succeeds brilliantly, sometimes she fails spectacularly, yet even her failures reshape the kingdom. Very few characters leave such unmistakable marks upon the history of the Seven Kingdoms. The unfinished nature of the novels adds another layer to that fascination. The Winds of Winter remains unpublished, leaving Cersei poised between danger and opportunity. She still possesses formidable resources. Sir Robert Strong stands ready to defend her in trial by combat. Tommen remains king. The Tyrell alliance has weakened but not collapsed. Across the sea, Daenerys Targaryen commands dragons whose eventual arrival could overturn every existing calculation. Young Aegon's invasion advances through the Stormlands. The others gather beyond the wall, while most southern lords continue fighting over crowns. Cersei's next decisions may prove either her greatest triumph or her final mistake. And Martin has intentionally left that future unwritten. There is another irony worth considering before the night ends. Throughout her life, Cersei believed she was protecting House Lannister above all else. Tywin taught that the family name must outlive every individual member. Jaime fought countless battles beneath the Crimson Lion for that same ideal. Tyrion, despite endless rejection, repeatedly risked his life defending his family's position. Yet each sibling understood that legacy differently. Tywin valued discipline. Jaime gradually discovered honor. Tyrion pursued survival through wit. Cersei sought absolute security through control. None of them fully achieved the future they imagined, but together they transformed House Lannister into the defining dynasty of their generation. Perhaps that is why the famous words spoken in the Godswood continue echoing across the years. When you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die. Readers often hear only the final choice between victory and death. Cersei understood another truth hidden inside the sentence. The game never truly ends while rivals remain alive, ambitions endure, and history continues recording names. Every apparent victory creates another challenge. Every alliance invites another betrayal. Every crown attracts another claimant. Power in Westeros is never possessed permanently. It is borrowed day by day from circumstances that refuse to remain still. Outside the Red Keep, the city finally settles into silence. The harbor lanterns shimmer across the dark waters of Blackwater Bay. Wind slips through arrow slits, carved centuries earlier by Targaryen masons. Somewhere below, the bells of the Great Sept rest quietly until morning. The same narrow window still overlooks the sleeping capital, just as it did before dawn at the beginning of our journey. Beside it stands the image that has followed us through every chapter, not simply a queen in crimson and gold, but a woman who spent her entire life watching people as carefully as others watched armies. Whether you judge Cersei Lannister as a tragic ruler, a dangerous tyrant, or one of the sharpest political minds in the history of Westeros, one conclusion remains difficult to escape. She saw patterns that others ignored. She recognized threats before they fully emerged. She understood that crowns rested upon perception as much as swords.
Her greatest defeats often came not from ignorance, but from believing her own understanding had finally become complete. In George R.R. Martin's world, that may be the most dangerous illusion of all, because the game always contains one more player waiting quietly beyond the candlelight, studying the board while everyone else believes the match has already been won. If you linger with Cersei's story a little longer, you begin to notice that it was never only about one queen. It was about the strange way power reshapes everyone who reaches for it. In Westeros, wisdom rarely arrives as perfect judgment. It arrives as fragments gathered through loss, disappointment, and survival. Cersei learned early that love could vanish without warning, that kingdoms rewarded strength more readily than kindness, and that hesitation often carried its own terrible cost. Those lessons made her formidable, yet they also narrowed the path she believed the world would allow her to walk. By the end, the same instincts that preserved her through countless dangers became the walls of the prison she built around herself. George R.R. Martin returns to this idea again and again across his histories. The honorable man often fails because he cannot imagine dishonor. The ruthless ruler eventually discovers that fear cannot command genuine loyalty forever. The brilliant schemer succeeds until the board becomes too large for any one mind to control. Ned Stark, Tywin Lannister, Stannis Baratheon, Tyrion Lannister, Daenerys Targaryen, and Cersei all glimpse part of the truth, but none possess the whole of it. Every ruler mistakes one principle for the entire world. Martin's kingdoms remain alive because no single philosophy is ever enough to master them. Perhaps that is why prophecy feels so powerful in these books. It rarely forces a character toward a destination. Instead, it quietly changes the choices made along the road. Maggie the Frog did not teach Cersei cruelty, ambition, or determination. Those qualities already lived within her. The prophecy simply gave every fear a face and every rival a familiar shape. Looking back across her life, you can almost feel how often she stood at a crossroads believing she was escaping fate, only to discover she had taken another step toward the very future she wished to avoid. The tragedy is not that destiny proved stronger than free will, but that fear slowly convinced her the two were the same thing. History inside Westeros will almost certainly argue about Cersei long after every witness has disappeared. Some maester will write that she was reckless. Another will insist she possessed uncommon political vision. A singer will remember only the beauty of the Golden Queen. A septon will remember only her sins. Somewhere, hidden beneath all those competing versions, remains the real woman, intelligent, frightened, fiercely protective, deeply flawed, capable of remarkable insight and equally remarkable blindness. You are left with the same uncertainty that fills so much of Martin's world, not deciding whether Cersei was entirely right or entirely wrong, but recognizing how easily extraordinary gifts can become extraordinary weaknesses when they are no longer questioned. Now the night has grown quiet again. The candles inside the Red Keep have burned low, leaving only soft pools of light upon ancient stone. Beyond the narrow window, King's Landing rests beneath the darkness, just as it did when our journey began. The harbor breathing gently against the shore, while unseen guards continue their patient watch along the walls. Somewhere inside those silent towers, echoes of old councils, whispered promises, broken oaths, and impossible ambitions
still seem to linger between the stones. And as you let those echoes drift farther away, the queen at the window becomes only another shadow among many, watching over a sleeping city that has already begun forgetting the people who once believed they could rule it forever.